Welcome to another podcast of TBN Israel. Mati, it's been like 4 podcasters already.
We're here again.
Yeah, good to have you here.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to see how positive the response has been with our viewers. I'm happy to see, because I deeply love this myself, to see that people appreciate the deep discussions.
Definitely.
And today we have an even deeper discussion. We're breaking down the topic of the neighbors of our country.
Yes, and we're going to focus on the neighbors that we have peace agreements with, meaning Israel, Egypt, and then Israel, Jordan. Okay, These borders, that's the focus of today. So, I'm Yair Pinto.
I'm Shoshani.
And it's great to be with you for another TBN Israel podcast. Let's get going.
So first, we want to frame why we're here. Mm-hmm. We're here because we believe that 10-minute segments are not enough. We need more. We need an opportunity to go deeper. We're aiming for about 45 to 60 minutes of diving deep into a different topic every week. And so far, one, the conversation has been very enjoyable personally, but two, I think the opportunity for our viewers, our listeners to listen to and think through these things has been very well received.
Yes.
But I think before we dive into the deep content, you know, our borders have shifted in recent days.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is sort of the situation in this part of the world. Just in the last couple of days, the location of where our country ends, or where our control as a country ends, has changed. We've moved into the Rafah area, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago.
Rafah is in the Gaza Strip.
Yes.
It's the southernmost city in Gaza. It's bordering Egypt, and that's the last stronghold of Hamas. On normal days, Rafah has 250,000 Palestinians, but now, since the war started and all the civilian population was moved to that city, they have about 1.3, mostly living in tents. Million, 1.3 million, yes. Not 1.3 people.
That would be depressing.
And so it's a humanitarian situation, and it's a big issue because Hamas is hiding there. Potentially, they hide the Israeli hostages under tunnels underneath Rafah, and the IDF needs to enter and destroy this terror threat while protecting the civilian population. That's the complex issue that we have there. And in recent days, the IDF moved forces into the Philadelphia corridor. The Philadelphia corridor, for all of you to understand, is basically a road that is going along the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. So the plan is basically to have Israeli forces bordering between Egypt and Gaza, so that we are surrounding Hamas terrorists in Rafah. Right?
So to frame this, it's the final note.
Yes.
And the military operation that was sort of kicked off or initiated on the October 7th events. We've been waiting for this for months. There's been Israeli internal discussion, there's been defense discussion, there's been international community discussion.
Humanitarian discussion.
Over the need to, on the one end, and we talked about this in depth in a previous episode, to finish the military move in the Gaza Strip, to strip Hamas of its weaponry, to retrieve what hostages we can retrieve, and also, very importantly, to cut off the financial and economic lifeline between the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip that passes on the road you just mentioned, the Philadelphia corridor that borders between the countries, and that's where historically a lot of these smuggling has happened. So that just happened in recent days, where we're taking over area that was controlled by Hamas, and now preventing them from continuing the trade, the smuggling, the human trafficking back and forth across the border with Egypt. So just these days, we're talking about borders. Our border with Egypt, our border with Hamas and Gaza has shifted. And that is a headline over there.
No, that's huge, definitely, Mati. And when we say that the IDF is there, it means that tanks are there, infantry is there, artillery. The IDF began striking specific terror targets in the Rafah area. And these are areas that civilians are not inside them, but are controlled by Hamas terrorists. And the goal is to encircle Hamas terrorists inside Rafah and then close in on them, while at the same time transferring the civilian population to a safe area outside of the city or in Khan Yunis to the north. And just for everybody to understand, we've been fighting this war for 6 months, more than 6 months now. And only a few days ago, Hamas launched missiles against the border crossing between Israel and the Gaza Strip and killed 4 Israelis.
Yeah, soldiers.
Yes. And
who were serving at the border crossing, passing humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip.
Exactly.
And if ever there was a question, and there shouldn't have been, but if ever there was a question whether Hamas has a good side to them, or whether there's a doubt about should we fully, disarm and disassemble the Hamas government in the Gaza Strip, both militarily speaking and from a civil governance perspective, the answer is a resounding yes. The fact that 6 months into this operation, where their population has suffered, where they've been handed multiple offers of ceasefires, all they need to do in return is return the hostages that they've kidnapped, Israeli citizens, they kidnapped from within Israel. And they've repeatedly chosen the path of violence, the path of death, and they've even fired on the very people that are bringing humanitarian aid into their own civilian population.
Definitely.
So it's just, it's mind-blowing that their show of evil, the show of how clearly they've chosen the path of violence. And also, it's just a resounding, it's not a wake-up call anymore. It's a repeat call that we haven't been listening to of there is only one option. The option is dismantling Hamas. Full stop, period. There is no other option.
Definitely. That's the only way for a future for Israel. That's the only way for a future for the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, for the Palestinians living in the Judea and Samaria area, and for this entire region.
Yeah.
And I think that we understand it, the United States understands it, and a few of our regional allies understand or begin to understand this situation. But I think it's time to go into the border between Israel and Egypt. Mati, maybe you can start by elaborating a little bit about the relationship between Israel and Egypt. I mean, now we have peace, but this wasn't the case for
much of our history.
Definitely.
So let's zoom out. First of all, who is Egypt?
Okay.
And who is Egypt as far as Israel is considered? Israel is a small country that is surrounded with a very complex and zigzag-shaped border with multiple countries, very narrow in certain parts in both northern and southern Israel. Egypt is our biggest neighbor to the west. We share a very long, several hundred miles long border with the Egyptian country to our west that runs from the Mediterranean Sea all the way down to the Red Sea. They control what's called the Sinai Peninsula, which twice in Israeli history was controlled by the Israeli government. And Egypt is the biggest country in our neighborhood, biggest land-wise, biggest population-wise. They're one of the biggest Arab countries in the world. They have close to 115 million people in the country. They are a country with a less advanced, we'll say this politely, economy, less advanced workforce.
Majority of them are Muslims.
Yeah, a strong, vast majority of the country is Muslim. And the country, and this is very important to understand the conversation, the country has been for a very long time controlled by a military regime.
Yes.
I mean,
the president.
Yeah, the current president is a military leader.
Yes.
He took over the country in a military coup.
Correct.
His predecessor was the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood who violently took over Egypt during the Arab Spring. And previously to that, they were controlled by, again, a military officer or a series of military officers who were all democratically elected in the way that people are democratically elected in non-democratic states.
By 97% vote of confidence,
exactly.
which means something is wrong over there.
So this country is not very much a democracy. They have elections, but it's always the same guy who wins for the most part.
Yes.
That's the guy who controls.
Kind of like in Russia.
Yeah, it's the guy, allegedly. We'll save that comment for our podcast on Russian interest in the Middle East. But yeah, so strong man society, weak economy, low on the technology side, low on the manufacturing side, low on the information industries, very reliant on, menial tasks. So people doing labor, agriculture,
building,
small trade, so very much like an emerging second world economy.
Exactly.
They have a huge problem with the poverty. Huge.
Yeah. I've been there, Mati. It's like I've been to the streets of Cairo, and as you get out of the taxi or the car, you have children that are poorly dressed and they beg for money and they just don't leave you alone until you give them some money. And then more come.
Yeah, and
like,
this will be a reoccurring theme on today's show.
Yeah.
Is you don't understand what poverty looks like, and you don't understand what lack of opportunity looks like, excuse me, until you visited some of these countries. We live in a westernized country, Israel, where the poor people in our country are rich compared to our neighbors.
Yeah.
I mean, they are well above, not even median income, they're well above the average income. So Egypt is a poor country with an enormous population, with an enormous young population, very, very high birth rate.
Yeah.
A high percentage of their population is barely educated, so they don't finish high school. A high percentage of their economy is reliant on military, on the government's control of natural assets, so natural gas and other resources, and the Suez Canal and tourism.
Yeah.
They're not incredibly rich in other natural resources. They don't have any big tech or industry centers that generate a large GDP. So the country has been poor. It's been fighting with economic struggles for quite a few years. And their financial position, their internal pressures of poverty, of food scarcity, of lack of resources, lack of ability to emerge out of the place they're in, financially speaking, it shapes their entire worldview as it comes to other neighbors. And I'm saying this because you need to understand that to understand how they engage with Israel as far as like Hamas goes.
Yeah, this is the geopolitics of all this region, because we need to understand who's in control and the politics of that country in order to understand their responses to the neighboring conflicts for, say, the Gaza Strip, Rafah, Israel.
Yeah.
Okay, so
here's my thought practice or my thought exercise. I love going into the mind of the person who's sitting at the helm. Like you can never understand a country if you can't understand the decision-making matrix that the leader of that country has.
So let's go into the mind of Sisi.
So let's go into the mind of President Sisi, the president of Egypt. He's sitting at his desk, and on a daily basis, he's hearing reports on the financial pressure on his country. They carry enormous national debt.
Yeah.
They have small cash reserves. They have small foreign cash reserves. Their income that was reliant to a certain degree on the Suez Canal, because canals, Suez Canal, Panama Canal, they heavily tax ships that go through for the right of passage.
They basically make the shipping routes really short because the ships from Asia don't need to go all across Africa in order to reach the United States or Europe.
Exactly. So he's sitting there. They've lost money on the Suez Canal because of the Houthis in Yemen and the Hormuz Straits, the Bab el-Mandab Straits. So there's Red Sea Straits leading into that area. And let's call it the overall lack of security and safety for ships passing through the Red Sea. So they've lost a lot of the traffic there. They have economic pressures internally that are affecting their future. And if they're looking at, in 6 months, in 12 months, in 24 months, forget a 5-year plan. Yeah. How do we pay our bills? How do we feed our people? How do we pay the bills for government employees? How do we keep the engines running in our military vehicles? They have a problem. Yeah. So they're overwhelmed by internal pressures. The war in Ukraine, and this is where geopolitics become interesting. The war in Ukraine strongly affected the Egyptian economy. Why?
How is that?
They import wheat from Ukraine.
Okay, so now they need to find other wheat.
Exactly. So the Russians, and this is what, you mentioned the Russians obviously prevented a lot of the Ukrainian wheat export. Mm-hmm. Then the prices of bread went up in Egypt. And if you have, and both of us do, if we remember what was the trigger for the Arab Spring, it was the price of bread that went up.
Yeah.
The basic staple of food for people is going up in Egypt, so their economy is under strain. And then again, they're led by what we would call in our language a military junta, a leadership of military elite.
Yes.
And their thought process is coming from the military.
So what do you do in order to solve economic problems? You need to create a military work for the population, either a military campaign, either a training, or, which is actually pretty new, is to build another city, which is another thing that they do. No, yeah, so this is where we are now. But let's talk about the interest of Egypt, Rafah, which is in the Gaza Strip, and Israel. What's up with this situation? What are the Egyptians trying to achieve or to prevent that will happen because of the Israeli offensive against Rafah? And what are the fears?
So they play this really funny game, and they're not the only ones. This will be a reoccurring
Everybody's
theme.
playing
Everyone's
multiple
playing
games here.
You're speaking on the one hand to your internal allies,
and then in English you say something else.
Exactly.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
Everybody does that.
We do the same.
Yeah, we have like different titles for operations in Hebrew and English.
Yeah, and our prime minister says one thing in English and another thing that's contradicting to it in Hebrew. So their government is saying on the one hand, Arab solidarity. The Hamas are our brothers. The Palestinian people are our brothers. Same day, same person.
Yeah.
When he's talking about Israel and the Egyptian says, listen, we're going to tolerate anything. We'll tolerate almost anything in our relationship. If you let the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip into our country, we're done.
Yeah.
The peace accords are gone. We're done.
Yeah. So what they did is reinforcing the borders, is to bring more military force into the Sinai Peninsula, allegedly in order to act against terrorists in the Sinai Peninsula. For, say, the Islamic State still operates there on various levels. Hamas, smugglings of weapons happen there. And let me just go back a little bit to the interest here, because the former leadership of Egypt were the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
And the biggest supporters of Hamas are the Muslim Brotherhood. Yeah. Same ideology, same leadership. So Egypt is really afraid that Hamas influence will pour into its country.
Yeah.
Because there are still parties that want and support the Muslim Brotherhood inside Egypt. So that's a big fear for the leaders of Egypt. So they do not want Hamas to win on the one hand. On the other hand, they want to stand by their Palestinian brothers and their Arab brothers in this region. And then on the third hand, they don't want 1.3 million Palestinian refugees to take care of in Egypt, in the Sinai Peninsula, because of all these economic problems that we've been discussing in the past 10 minutes or so.
Listen, again, we're going back to the decision-making matrix for Sisi, President Sisi. Always complex. On the one end, and this isn't, these people are not hypocritical. I want to be clear here. They live a very complex life, and they lead a very complex country in a complex situation. That's any country anywhere, so much more so in the Middle East.
Definitely.
He's having to deal with, if we're thinking about the Egyptian agenda, internally, economic pressures, internally, political tensions between, let's call it Muslim extremism, that pushes towards Hamas alliances, and a secular military governance. Between impoverished society, where the threat of having several million people from the Gaza Strip enter into your country is a financial problem, not even like a political problem, aside from the politics of it.
Definitely.
And then the projection of power. Like if they allow the Israeli government to force Hamas people into the Sinai Peninsula, it will be a show of weakness on their government.
And a show of support to the Israelis.
Yes.
And that can jeopardize their relationship with other countries in this region that are not so friends with Israel.
Exactly. And then when you look at it from that perspective, suddenly becomes so clear why you can't just have like clear answers and clear decisions on things.
Definitely.
Because whatever you do, you're going to be...
Somebody's going to be upset, and it's going to have a very heavy toll on your country and your people, and potentially also on yourself as a leader. Because everything in these sort of countries goes down to the head, to the leader, like personally, his family and himself. The decisions are very crucial.
We say this jokingly, like all the answers are yes, but. Yes, I care about this issue, but I can't do it because of this thing. So the Egyptian government is between a rock and a hard place, as we say. They have a lot of very external and internal pressures. And then if you look at their map of interests, who are their allies? They fall in ideologically speaking, or I should call it as far as like a family affiliation goes, with this idea of like the Pan-Arabian alliance, where they're part of the Arab world. But in reality, if you look at geopolitics and who they actually align with, they're on the American axis. Friends of the USA, not friends of the Soviets, not friends of the Arab countries. So USA, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, we're in that sort of alliance, and they're having to play this game, and it's a very complex game of, okay, we're getting military gear from you, financial aid, World Bank is helping us with this problem, and at the same time, we really can't be open about how cooperative
because we want our people to still support us in this way.
Because we might be, they might like drag us out of our palace and throw us in the street.
Definitely. You like the Arab Spring easily again. So, but let's talk about military power a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a situation in Rafah. We have now Israeli tanks on the border with Egypt, and then Egypt increasing its military presence in the Sinai Peninsula, which is also more than what is allowed in the Israeli-Egyptian peace agreement. Of course, everything is coordinated because we're fighting terrorism and everything is okay, but still this raises questions.
Yeah.
We used to have a bunch of kilometers away from each other without a big military presence, and now less and less and less. And even less now because of the situation with Hamas in Rafah, in Gaza. Okay, so maybe we can say a little bit about the Egyptian army. Is this army bigger than the Israeli army? Who's going to win in a one-on-one battle if things goes there in this Rafah situation?
So we talked about this earlier. I mean, the Egyptian army is an army to be reckoned with. They are a real army. They are professional. They are trained. They are equipped. And they have been for a very long time. And they have a proud and long history of having a strong army. This isn't for show. It's not like some of these dictatorships have an army that's more for show than actually for action. This army has trained. This army has
training.
Is training. Has gone to war. Is well equipped with Western and modern weaponry, and has the financial and the social support to be an effective and powerful army. And they are ready and they are prepared to fight whoever the enemy is. And I say this clearly: whoever the enemy is. Including us if needed. And they have this, this very unique moment. There are no leaks in the press world when it comes to governments. The leaks are all intentional.
The leaks are from the government.
If you're at home and you don't know this, let me tell you, when a government accidentally leaks an image that changes the way the world thinks about them, it's not an accident. It's not an accident. Definitely. It was intentional. So the Egyptian army accidentally, quote unquote, if you're hearing this, I'm doing air quotes, they quote unquote accidentally release an image where, was it the president? The head of one of the
governmental official.
Some official visits a military drill, a high-level military drill, and oops, by chance, it's an image of them analyzing how to attack Israeli tanks. Not an accident, not a mistake.
What angle to shoot and stuff like that. Definitely.
Definitely not an accident, definitely not a mistake. It was a very strong message of, we're still powerful, we're still present, we still mean business, and we were very serious when we said, we don't want you breaking through the border and pushing out Hamas operatives, whatever the number is, into the Sinai Peninsula.
Just to put it into perspective, they have more than 100 million people. Israel has close to 10 million people. Just imagine the size of the army compared to the army of the Israelis. Even though we are more advanced with technological abilities, but this is not going to be an easy war if it happens.
And again, if you look at, so they're a military superpower in the sense that they have an enormous military. And they have many, many tanks, many soldiers with many guns. On the numbers game, they're far superior to the Israeli army. But modern wars are fought both in numbers and technology. Sorry, like half awake here. They're fought both in the number game and the technology game. And when it comes to technological superiority,
we are superior.
Israel is superior.
Definitely.
By far.
And we proved it just now, a few weeks ago, with the Iranian attack against us. Both on defense and also on offensive capabilities.
And again, but the Egyptians, they play a complex game in a complex world. They're sort of maneuvering between their American interests, their Western interests. They're keeping face with all their Western counterparts, and at the same time with the alliance into the Arab world, the pressures from their population, and the need to preserve power internally. So I don't want to say their hands are tied, because they have the freedom to do whatever they want.
They also pre-plan and think ahead. What are their next steps and how they will affect? And also with these negotiations with Hamas, they're playing key roles as a mediator and as facilitating these deals in Cairo.
That is an important point. In the point which is that countries that have a rich history, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, these countries, they always, in their collective mindset, they go back to this thought of we were the empire. And they always try to reshape the world into those terms. And the Egyptians do that. You won't hear the Jordanians do it,
Yeah.
Because they don't have that.
But the Turks do it.
But the Turks
do it all the time.
They always talk about, we're going to go back to that.
To the Ottoman Empire.
Whenever it was, yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to be that superpower again. And the way they speak to their population, the way they shape their position in the Arab world is always trying to position themselves. I'm not just the guy you know today. I'm also that guy from like 3,000 years ago or whatever it was.
And we all are going to be there back once again.
So you say, so they want to mediate in the peace agreements or the discussions, the negotiations between Israel, the Hamas, the Americans, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, whoever it is. They always want to be at that table, not just because they want to be part of the conversation, which they do, because it positions them as a
key player.
A key player at a party of influence.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I think we talked a lot about Egypt, and we know that anything can change any moment now with this war. 1.3 million people, if they cross the border into Egypt, it can change this whole Middle East into a huge war or something even bigger than that. But we have another border, and that's to our east. It's our longest border, basically from the Sea of Galilee eastward on the Jordan River with the Dead Sea, and then going south until Eilat and Aqaba, right? And then, so it's Israel's longest border. And we have peace with Jordan. Let's go and explain a little bit what is Jordan. Maybe you can elaborate in the big picture. Jordan is like a huge country, right? And in size. In population, a little bit less than Egypt.
I was saying, so Jordan is a relatively small country in this area.
Compared to...
in a neighborhood of superpowers. Of the Iranians, of the Iraqis,
of
the Saudis, so Jordan is a relatively small country on every aspect. Economically speaking, population-wise, and as far as like the footprint goes, geopolitically speaking, they're similar to Israel, by the way.
But they're only 5 times bigger than us
in landmass. But much of that landmass is desert.
Yes.
So Jordan is a relatively poor country, and I'll explain that. They're poor in resources. They're poor in water, which is key.
It's key.
They're poor in access to trade. Very important because
they don't have a seaport.
They have only one port in the south.
Yeah.
But they, as far as land travel goes, they're locked between other countries. They're poor in population. They're a small country, and not only that, they're a minority government that controls a majority population. And that's sort of like, and here let's take 3 steps back to explain some of the problems in the Middle East. You always have to remember the origin story. The origin story is that through Western, first Ottoman and then Western influence, French, British, American later on, there are many countries where the ruling party or the ruling entity doesn't represent the majority of the population. It can be ethnically speaking, it can be religiously speaking, it can be both of the above. So Syria, for example, they're both a different ethnicity and religion and different group of the population. They're Alawite Muslims, which are a very small minority in Islam.
Small minority,
and they control a majority of a population that is opposed to them on every other level.
Yeah, Sunni and Shia.
Yeah. And the Jordanians, their history is they're the Hashemite family. Hashemite were previously Bedouin families that aided the British. If you know the story of Lawrence of Arabia. So there's this whole story of British influence at the end, sort of the twilights of the Ottoman Empire. They play a role in that. The Hashemites, both here and in Saudi and in other countries.
Yes.
And they're later given governance over that landmass. But the country is not Hashemite. It's not predominantly Bedouin. Yeah. It's predominantly Palestinian.
60%.
Debatable.
It's also hard to have accurate numbers, right?
That's exactly the point.
Key.
So think about it this way. Small ruling party, minority of the population, controls a majority Palestinian population. Very important to understand because, when you think about how their country talks, thinks, acts about the Israel relationship, that affects it.
No, definitely.
So they're that. They're poor in resources. Their population is poor. For me as an Israeli, I've been to Jordan many times, both on vacation, we have a peace agreement, and for work on production. It is a country with poverty that is way beyond what we see in this country. Way beyond what you can imagine in a Western country. Lovely people, lovely people, but they have internal pressures, they have internal financial issues. Again, another problem, they live in the neighborhood that is called the Middle East. In recent years, let's say last 20 years.
The best neighborhood in the world.
Yeah, possibly one of the worst neighborhoods in the world, as far as like stability goes. they had waves of immigrants to their country,
Yeah,
refugees
from Syria,
Exactly.
from Iraq, all of the effects of the Islamic State.
Yeah.
So that also weakens the economic situation, the political situation, and the power struggle inside the country.
Exactly.
Yeah, not to say now with all that is happening between Israel and the Islamic Jihad and Iran and Hamas, a major smuggling route of weapons from Iran and its proxies into Israel, into the Palestinian terrorist organization, is being sent through Jordan and through the border, which is very long between Israel and Jordan. So that's a major issue. And then if you go into politics of this whole situation, okay, so if this is a country that has close to 50% Palestinians in it, why is not that the Palestinian state? I mean, why not automatically nominated to a Palestinian state?
On some thin ice here. You're feeling very brave today, I can tell. I can already see the comments on this.
But it's not my decision, and that's why we do this podcast, to throw in interesting ideas. And listen, this is the major idea. I have a few answers of why. Of course, the Hashemite kingdom does not want the Palestinians to rule the country, and that's why they also support a Palestinian state in Israel. That's also, they want to make sure that the Palestinian issue will be dealt with within the Israeli borders.
Yes.
And they're not alone, because there's also millions of Palestinian refugees all across the Middle East, and all of them are not accepted as citizens in these Arab countries.
Yes.
Which is a different total issue. I think we should do a completely podcast on the Palestinian issue and the history of it in the Middle East. Write it down,
Put it on our list, No, but so you're incredibly correct. Jordan has a lot of problems. They're a country, if we think we have it hard, they have it harder. They're a sliver of a country inside a sea of terrifying enemies. I mean, their neighbors are the Iraqis, their neighbors are the Saudis, their neighbors are the Syrians, and they're pressed from every direction. One, by countries that have been falling apart for the good part of a decade.
Falling apart to terrorism and to extreme
they were in the middle of the sea of ISIS. That's around them.
And they were able to survive and to withstand this situation, meaning that their government and their infrastructure and their military is very capable and strong.
We'll get to that. They're incredibly strong. And they've had millions of refugees come into the country, millions and millions. And those refugees, not because they've done anything malicious, but because of the poverty that came with it, have decimated their economy. The Jordanian economy has taken an incredibly hard hit in the last couple of years, going on 10 years at this point. Of waves and waves of refugees that have brought down the wages, that have taken away the jobs from blue-collar jobs within Jordan, that have pressured their infrastructure, water, that have pressured their infrastructure as far as housing, as far as space, everything.
You just said water. Who's giving them water? Israel is giving them lots of water from the Sea of Galilee, which is a little tiny pond, by the way. If you think of the Sea of the Galilee and you read it in the Bible, you think it's a huge sea. It's basically a little lake pond that you can swim from one side to another if you're in shape. I don't know if you can do it now.
I can't, no.
I need to
I'm
try.
not a very efficient swimmer.
It can be also pretty stormy and windy if you read the verses about Jesus.
Some can swim across it,
and one can walk on it. Okay, so let's go.
So they have their pressures.
We had a war with them.
We've had many wars.
Many wars with them.
And I think their case is really unique in the sense that they've always... So the Egyptians, they don't share a population with us. With them, it's let's call it an ideological alignment with the Palestinian population. The Jordanians, they are the same population as the Palestinians. Many
Palestinians, actually from the eastern part of Jerusalem, have Jordanian passports.
Yes. And Jordan, and we'll go into the war history, Jordan had an illegal military occupation of a substantial part of what is today Israel. And they have a population that were, and still are in certain cases, citizens of the Jordanian country.
Living in Israel.
Who live in Israel.
Actually, in that area.
Down the street from us. So Israel's gone to war many times with Jordan. We fought against them in the Independence War. We fought against them repeatedly throughout history. And there's a period where the early... And again, you have to be very careful in the way you frame this. Let's call it the early PLO movement
Palestinian Liberation Organization movement. Yeah.
Let's call it the early terrorism waves that came out of the Palestinian people were housed within Jordan. And they were also encouraged by the Jordanian government for various reasons. We have almost a 20-year period in early Israeli history, from the 50s all the way into the 70s, where we're dealing with terrorism coming from the country of Jordan into the state of Israel, murdering Israeli citizens in their homes in our country. We call them the Fadayun, we call them, there's many names to that season, but we have a very rich and painful history of them sort of being the hotbed of terrorism. That all ends, I don't want to go too much into Jordanian history, but the Palestinians have, in the same way they've been a problem within the state of Israel, in being a violent and, set on violent society. They've been the same to the Jordanians. And the previous king of Jordan had a run-in with the Palestinians where they tried to assassinate him. And they kick out many of them from the country. They flee to Libya and other countries. So they have this very tenuous relationship. And then they have a tenuous relationship with Israel. 48, the Jordanians send their legion into Israel, and they conquer illegally. They were never part of this plan, against the UN decision, against the partition plan, they have nothing to do with the people of this country. They take over most of Judea and Samaria. They take over all of eastern Jerusalem, including the old city.
Are we staying now in Jordanian territory of that time?
We're on the last house on the Israeli side.
Last house on the Israeli side. Lots of bullets were flying right here.
Yeah, I've met people, older people today, who were on guard duty where we're sitting right now. Saying right over there, like where I'm pointing, was the fence between Israel and Jordan, and the snipers would fire at us from the Jordanian side. So they occupy what is Judea and Samaria and eastern Jerusalem.
And the old city of Jerusalem.
And they expel the Jews, and they destroy Jewish heritage, and they burn down our synagogues, and they desecrate the tombs of the Jews on the Temple Mount. On the foothills of the Temple Mount and on the Mount of Olives. And the Mount of Olives. It's this charged relationship.
But now we have peace.
Fast forward. Tell us the story of how we get there. I mean, it doesn't seem like a natural progression from war and both religious and political war to a peace agreement. And I think what's key is and many people miss this in history. It takes brave leadership to bring the peace. It takes bravery. And both the Jordanians and the Egyptians had that for a season. That's why we have peace agreements with them.
Definitely.
Our side didn't have to be incredibly brave to have a peace agreement with them.
Yeah, because we don't want to fight all the time.
We don't want to go to war.
It's not part of our ideology. We want to defend ourselves and live in peace. Also now even with Hamas.
Our society is always seeking, let's calm down, guys. Let's find the peaceful solution. For their countries, their leaders, the late King Hussein, the leaders, there was several leaders in Jordan, in Egypt who upheld also the peace. They systematically go against their population to have the peace. Later on, I think people get behind it, but they
make it really to sell it, sell peace.
They have to make a very brave decision.
We need to do the opposite in order to sell an operation, war, military, something. So we have the border with Jordan and with Israel. Are the relations strong now? We saw the attack against Israel from Iran. And the Jordanian Air Force was part of the coalition defending the state of Israel from the Iranian missiles that were fired. And we have U.S. bases in Jordan that also took part in this defensive activity against Israel. So we see that Jordan is part of this anti-Iran coalition that is forming now. So that's actually very encouraging. This is something that we cannot say about Egypt at this moment. But with Jordan, it's good. Potentially, we can have additional allies in the Middle East, and that's very encouraging. But everything can change and can rise and fall on the Temple Mount, because Jordan are still the custodians of the Temple Mount, and they still keep the rights to what is happening inside the Temple Mount. Who prays there? Who doesn't praise there? Who worships there? So it's also religious. It's still a religious war between Muslims, between Jews and Christians. Usually Jews and Christians are on one side.
That goes back to the previous comment on every country is fighting for position. And position is based on how you're perceived outside of your country and how you're perceived by your own people. So Israel signs a peace accord with the Jordanians in 1994. The late King Hussein, brave, intelligent individual, is the first sort of the Arab countries to even talk about, and this is in recent times, to talk about having a peace agreement with Israel. And it's been a good peace for the most part. As far as we know, there's a lot of intelligence that is shared. There's a lot of good has come out of that peace agreement. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And it's been a quiet peace border for the majority of that time.
Well, that's because they need us.
But that's
right?
always, that's
and
always
we
how
need
it
them.
is.
It's like that's
need
only with interest peace works
Israel,
in the Middle East.
Both people benefit from having the peace agreement, and both of us suffer from it from a certain degree. You could say, okay, maybe Israel could have taken away land from the Jordanians. So what?
What are they going to do with that land?
Yeah, the peace is more valuable.
Definitely.
The Jordanians are suffering internally from the fact that they have a peace agreement with Israel, and it's always a tenuous relationship. But at the same time, they get water and financial benefits and foreign aid from the Americans and weapons from the Americans.
Yeah, which they need because of everything that happened in the Middle East around them with ISIS, with Iran, with all the other threats. So this makes sense for both sides. So do you think that this peace will be sustainable even if something goes sideways with Hamas in this conflict?
So let's dive into the head of King Abdallah of Jordan.
Okay.
What is his decision-making matrix? King Abdallah leads a country of, I think they're officially 11 or 12 million people.
By the way, he's a pilot, which I think is pretty cool. He likes to take pictures in
he is,
his
airplanes. Their army was, like the Israeli army, I guess to a certain degree, built on the infrastructure that the British left behind, then trained by the Americans in later years and equipped by the Americans. He is a fighter leader. He's a pilot himself. He has been on camera. I've seen him handle a gun with his son, which I think is very cool. The guy.
How old is the son?
The son now is an adult, but back then he was a teenager. The guy knows how to handle himself in a fight.
Yeah,
he knows how to handle himself inside an attack helicopter, and he's both the commander of the army and the chief commander and the king of the country.
Yeah,
and he's sitting in a chair thinking about the financial pressures, but also how
security pressures
and how he maintains his government and his. He is a monarch of his country. How he protects the monarchy for the next generation, and that is a tough place to be sitting in. Tough place. They've done incredibly well in preserving their position, incredibly well, and they've done that by not hesitating to show force. The Jordanian, and again, there are some moments there. One, they understand press. I think there's a lot to learn from King Abdallah, and he does it in a way that isn't laughable, without naming any other leaders of countries. He didn't have to take off his shirt to look like a man. The guy, you see the way he operates. He understands press. He understands how to build a public persona, and he's led his country in a way that is strong enough to prevent any substantial opposition to him. There have been attempts, both internally in their family and politically, but he's been a very strong leader. And they've gone to war to protect that leadership. They've fought against ISIS. I mean, people might not know this, and I think it's easy to forget. One of the most substantial effects, negatively speaking, on ISIS in the Syrian desert was the Jordanian army. There's this early movie, and we're side trailing here, but it's an interesting story where ISIS captures a Jordanian pilot. Remember that? They put him in a cage. They put him in a cage. I hope we don't show this footage in the video.
No.
But, they put him in a cage. They set fire to him. And there was a reason. He was the family member of someone very important in the Jordanian government. And King Abdallah says, "Noted. I've seen what you did. It was no mistake. Now
wait for my turn.
Wait for my response." And their response is lethal. They unleash the full power of their air force, and they knock out a very substantial amount of the ISIS infrastructure in the eastern Syrian desert. And I'm fuzzy on the exact details. I think it might have been also outside of that area, but they're not shy to use their power at all, and they've done so again recently against what has become sort of the crime government of the Syrians, which does a huge amount of smuggling through the Egyptian, the Jordanian
lots of narcotics
desert.
and other weapons.
I find it to be a very impressive character. I find the fact that their government has lasted so long and they're so. Have you been to? I've traveled.
I haven't been to Jordan yet.
So
it's not far. I know. I need to go there.
I've had the privilege of being there. I think 11 or 12 times at this point. I've spent a substantial amount of time there. It is a tidy country. It is a law-abiding country. You feel the governance of law.
Really?
Jordan. Yeah.
Even in like parts that have only Bedouin cities, tents and stuff like that?
No, but yes, because they you're supposed to have the fear of God.
Yeah.
They have the fear of government. So they fear their government, not because they're just violent, because there's a rule of law in that country. And it goes all the way to the top. You feel like it's a structured, you feel like it's an organized country. I feel safe there as an Israeli, with very rare exceptions, which we won't go into today.
Well, that's good. I think, but Mati, we need to, wrap up and finalize what we've been talking to today. But first of all, I want to say, hey, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this podcast. If you like what you hear and want to hear more about what is happening here in Israel, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It really helps us to reach more and more people around the world. And if you like us to create additional content, maybe new content, first of all, you can suggest it because we're open to suggestions. Okay, one day I can say it in Hebrew next time. But also, please consider donating to our work here at TBN Israel, and we'll create additional content, additional videos from Jerusalem, from Israel, from the Middle East. And I think, Mati, it's a good time to sum up what we've talked about. We talked about Egypt. We talked about its political struggles, its economic struggles, its military ambitions and strategies. And basically, we've been trying to get into the mind of the president of Egypt because he's the guy who's making the decisions. So it's very important. I think we were able to understand a little bit the side of one of Israel's biggest neighbors, which is Egypt. We have a big border. Everything is connected. And we need to keep that in mind with any decision that Israel is making in this war against Hamas in Rafah.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think it's always important to bear in mind how complex the decision-making process and the leadership is of these countries. They don't live in a two-dimensional world. They live in a three-dimensional world that is highly, highly complex. And they pay a dear price for their mistakes. Their mistakes are not just played out in a smaller growth in their economy. Yeah. They could lose the government. They could lose in a war to their enemies.
They can lose their life.
They could lose their own life when they project weakness. Yeah. When they don't sort of have a strong hold on their country and project power outwardly, they could lose everything. Yeah. So you look at the Egyptians, you look at the Jordanians, countries with a lot of internal problems, countries with a tension between Islam and, let's call it, extremism, and the need to preserve power and the need to grow their country and move it into the 21st century.
Into the Western society.
Into Western society, to be in a first world country.
Definitely.
And they live a very hard life. And the relationship with Israel is a microcosm of all of that. Definitely. It's all those tensions, the Islam, the nationality, the desire to be a substantial player in worldview. All of that plays into this relationship. Mm-hmm. So you need to be wise on it. I think if there's one big takeaway is when you read the news, is always try to understand what the story is behind the headline, not the headline. Yeah. The headline's just today. Tomorrow it's irrelevant. It's understanding what happened behind it, why they released that snippet, why they released that picture.
What do they gain from that? What's the 3 steps ahead? And I think it's very important also to understand is that whatever is happening in Israel affects the Middle East, and whatever happens in the Middle East affects the entire world. Nothing stays in the Middle East. So that is why we need to understand the situation and pray for the situation, because all of the topics that we discuss end up at one location, that this is a spiritual war between ideologies, between faiths, and that's where we need to, put our effort as followers of Yeshua and really pray for the situation, because we know that we can talk military, politics, but if we don't understand the root, which is spiritual, nothing will be resulted here in this region.
I mean, I think you could always take that one step forward, which is when you really understand how complex things are here, it leads you with one of 2 emotions, or despair or complete hope. Definitely. Despair because you understand and you can't really control the outcome. And complete hope because if you read the Bible and you follow the story of God, you know that he's been faithful through every page of the Bible from one end to the other. We haven't played it all yet.
crazy hard circumstances
100% of
and
the time.
situations. Yeah.
He's always been faithful. It's always been more complex than what we can imagine. And when you see things through that, you can understand the complexity. You can appreciate the complexity. It's important to learn about it. But at the same time, you can be at peace knowing that God is sovereign and his plan always plays out in the favor of those who follow his word.
Yeah.
I think there's one more important thing, and I'll say this to our viewers. If you like this content and care about it, please share it. We're new to this whole podcast thing. Even if you're watching this on wherever it is in video form, go into the podcast store on Apple for now. It might be in other places later, and hit the subscribe button or the follow button on the podcast. And if you're new to the YouTube channel, make sure you follow the YouTube channel and also have the notifications on. So when this is released again, you can share it. And even sending it to one other person matters, because there's a whole information war going out there. We're sitting here comfortably in the studio. There are many people out there on the other side who are spreading false information and false narrative about what's happening in this part of the world. And we need you at home to share the truth about what's happening here in Israel.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was a pleasure, Marty.
Always.
Thanks again for another podcast. And we'd like to wish you guys a great evening, morning, or wherever you're watching it, and at whatever time. And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.